with us on Zoom, and welcome along as well to Lindsay McKenzie on Zoom. I have no apologies. I haven't formally received any apologies, which moves us on to the public forum. There were no items of public forum. There are two items that were being briefed on shortly, but nothing in the public forum section, which brings us speedily along to the Youth Council. So Ryan and Brooklyn, I think? No, he's not looking like a Ryan. Yes? Oh, sorry, yep. Didn't see you sitting on the other side, Ryan, sorry.
Kia ora, councillors.
Welcome along.
Thank you. Ko Perongia te maunga, ko Waipu te awa, ko Tainui te waka, kai Ngātu, Ngātai apakura te iwi, kai Ngātai kinitu te hapo, ko Brooklyn toku ingoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Takitimu toku maunga, ko Oriti toku awa, ko Remawera toku waka, ko Verdun toku kura, ko Frost toku whānau, ko Ryan toku ingoa, nō reira. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. My name is Ryan Frost, and I will be reporting to you this evening with Brooklyn.
So, about a week and a half ago, Ryan and I had the opportunity to attend Festival for the Future in Wellington. It was a pretty incredible experience, and the point of Festival for the Future was to ultimately discuss issues that are affecting young people in New Zealand and the actions that we can take to help stop these issues and to prevent them. So there is a big focus over equality and climate change, and also with the possibility of a looming recession after the pandemic. The program of events focused on rangatahi, and each morning there were 3 keynote speakers. Then we went into our breakout sessions. There were 2 of these throughout the day, and then we had 3 more speakers in the afternoon to finish us off. I think my favourite speaker was definitely Shneel Lau, who has been a driving force in the banning conversion therapy in New Zealand, which had its first reading at Parliament over the weekend. Yes.
Festival for the Future for me was a very valuable experience. Many speakers provided a good insight into their life experiences and some of the challenges that they faced and how they overcome those challenges. The workshops that were provided there were a cool experience. I personally attended a shares and investing one held by Sharesies, and that was very interesting to attend and see some of fellow youth's opinion on some of the matters and how they viewed investing and savings. We also attended Mural lunch when we arrived, which we were greeted by Andy Foster, the Mayor of Wellington, and then he held a 15-minute presentation and greeted us to the festival. Then there was a small lunch. Yes. Also, I would like to, on behalf of myself and the Youth Council, I would like to greatly thank the Council and the Invercargill ratepayer for affording us the opportunity to be able to go to the Festival for the Future, as we believe it was a valuable experience for ourselves and Youth Council to be able to attend a festival like this. So thank you. I think that's pretty much it for the Festival for the Future. Recently at Youth Council last week, we had a meeting where Kirsten Harper, the City Centre Coordinator from Great South, came to speak to us, and she took us to the information hub for the CBD, and we tour around there and got to see some of the progress that has been made on the city centre development. We also took a walk outside around the back of Reading Cinemas and got to look at the construction. Some questions were asked about the presentation Amy Hibbs presented about the progress being made, and we believe that it was very cool to see the progress that had been accomplished so far with some of the halfway milestones that we've come to. We also spoke about the City Centre Streetscapes project, where we looked at the terms of how progress was just getting started, and we believe that was really interesting to see. And yeah, we believe it's very important, and it's great to see that the city streets upgrade is now beginning. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions about?
So, thank you for that. And can I also acknowledge Councillor Crackett, who gave up her weekend to attend the Festival for the Future with our Youth Council representatives. I'm keen to understand how you think going to an event like that's helped you develop personally, you know, in developing leadership skills and a sense of voice.
Yeah. For me, anyway, I found it very valuable. I personally had never been to anything like that before, so I mean, it was good for some personal growth for myself, because I had never flown or stayed anywhere by myself, so that was a good thing for me personally. But it was also, in a sense, inspiring to see some of the challenges, because all around us we always hear about many of these challenges that we face in life, and to see that these people and many of their speakers not only acknowledge those challenges but actually presented a way of how they overcome these challenges and actually had a solution to the problems that we face, rather than just continuing to state more problems.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. The first one is, as with us going to the local government conference in Blenheim 4 weeks ago, did you find mingling with other like-minded junior people from New Zealand and sharing ideas and finding out the different problems they have to what you guys have? I mean, sharing information is an important thing at these conferences. Did you have a chance to sort of mix and mingle?
Yeah, there were plenty of opportunities to talk to other youth councillors. I personally, at the investing workshop, I met some Wellington youth councillors, and I also saw the Southland youth councillors there, and we sort of discussed what we thought of all the speakers and some of the topics that they had been discussed.
Thanks. And my other question now, I can't resist, is did you talk about the 16-year voting age?
No, there wasn't a topic that was brought up that I heard of at the festival anyway.
Right. Was there any talk about it?
Not by any of the speakers that presented, quite possibly amongst other people, but no one I came into contact.
No, thanks for that.
Councillor Crackett.
I would like to move the report, but also make comment on the three major things that I thought were really valuable about this Festival for the Future. And I can't actually stress how fantastic this conference was. Like, it was actually put together so well, but in a fashion that is given to you in a digestible format for young rangatahi. Like, I'm not sure how many people in this room knows what cancel culture is, but that's just something that is rife in rangatahi, or on social media and in the internet and stuff these days. And if a lot of the time, some of the older demographic and that kind of thing, and the kinds of things that you expect rangatahi to communicate with these days doesn't resonate in the way that they communicate. So for me, one of the huge standout points was that all of this content was delivered in a manner that was actually digestible for the rangatahi to empathise with, I suppose. It was really cool to see lots of work streams that typically are some of the things that young people say that they don't get taught in the education system that we have today, like how to have a growth mindset was one of the work streams. They also had, like Ryan said, about sharesies and how to manage your wealth with zero and things like that you wouldn't that you don't typically see. One of the most inspiring things, because there was a huge social element to it as well, and there was a young politician, the youngest politician in New Zealand actually. Her name's Sophie Hanford, and she's a Kapiti district councillor, or Kapiti councillor, and she led the school strike for climate change. she's a really incredible example of somebody their age that has led a national, something of national significance that has now, as a result of that, we have climate change zero response, the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Amendment Bill as a result of her action. So, I mean, it's demonstrative of that somebody, doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, can take that kind of national action and get a result out of it. So, I'd like to thank the Invercargill ratepayer. It was actually my birthday while I was away on that weekend, for giving me the opportunity and the honour to take our young rangatahi up there and be involved.
Thanks, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Soper.
Just one last thing before we go. We just have a question for Council. We'd just like to know if Council has yet to develop a stance on the Three Waters reform and what that would be, and if so, not yet come to a conclusion if that a report could be sent to Youth Council.
I think Councillor Crackett and I will explain that at the next meeting, but Council does not have a position at this point.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks.
We
Thanks
will
for your
do.
question. Any further questions for our Youth Council representatives? No? If not, it's been moved and seconded that their report is received. I'll put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much for, we are out of holidays now, getting out of school early and coming along to speak to your report. Really appreciate it. And pleased to hear that you enjoyed the experience in Wellington.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillors, that moves us up to the next item, which is an update from the Southland and Otago Regional Engineering Collective. Kerry, welcome along if you'd like to take a seat.
Thank you. Kia ora, thank you very much for the invitation to come along and speak to you all. I must say I find it a little bit intimidating speaking up to two such articulate and intelligent young people. So, yes, I feel quite a lot older now. Thank you, as I said, for the invitation to come and talk to you. This emerged after a conversation between Claire Hadley and I about what SORIC is and what its objectives are and potential are to make a difference in Southland and Otago. And we thought it was a great opportunity to explain more about the organisation, what our objectives are, what we've achieved and what our plans are for the future. So I have a presentation, but please feel free to ask any questions as I'm moving through. So SORIC, SOREC, people call it all sorts of different things. We have an acronym because it's the Southland and Otago Regional Engineering Collective, which obviously rolls off the tongue. We are focused on Southland and Otago, but our priority area is manufacturing engineering across those two regions, across the broader southern region. In terms of when we were established and how we are funded and set up, SORIC was officially established in 2020, just before the world went a little bit crazy, to last for 3 years to establish itself within the sector and across those regions with the support of the Provincial Growth Fund. So we are fully funded through PGF for a period of 3 years to support that sector and its long-term growth. Around the same time, a number of projects were funded for specific capital investments through the PGF for specific pieces of machinery that were designed to improve productivity or were innovative in their approach. That's separate to SORIC, but emerged from the same conversations around regional economic growth. So in terms of our mission, our very broad mission is future-proofing our trade, the manufacturing engineering sector. That's huge, but obviously comes across as a very straightforward mission when you put it into four small words. The benefit of an organisation such as SORIC, which is able to act independently on behalf of its member organisations, is that we are able to be nimble and agile and respond to the needs of our sector both now and into the future. We have 4 very broad priorities which were originally identified back in 2018, 2019 as part of a survey across the sector to obviously PGF funding, what does the sector need in order to grow effectively into the future? And these 4 themes emerged, and despite the global shocks we've had since then, remain our areas of focus, remain relevant today. So the first one of that is in building the sector's capability. What we are trying to achieve as an organisation, help the sector achieve, is to think within a future growth mindset, particularly when it comes to new and emerging technologies. And within that, I'm talking about things like robotics, automation, programming, all these extra skills that people are having to try and bring into our sector to be able to be as competitive as we can. Most of those fall within a very broad banner of Industry 4.0, but it's a future focus, a future mindset that will help us as a sector in our growth objectives. Another broad priority is in attracting work. We recognise that Southland and Otago, as a manufacturing engineering sector, work very well together. That's not the case. We know that's not the case across the country and globally as well. We know it's a real strength of our sector, the ability and the general want to be able to work together successfully and build on those informal partnerships that we have already established quite well. So through strengthening those connections and those collaborations, our aim is to compete for new work outside of our region, whether that be across New Zealand or broader globally as well. Sectors that we're thinking about and targeting in this field are defence, aquaculture, space, for example. Another priority, and this I would argue is our most significant and underpins everything we do, is developing our tradespeople. We hear from this sector, and I know more broadly that this is not just something that's unique to our sector, but common more broadly across the labour market, is that industry needs more fit-for-purpose regional apprenticeships, attracting more young people to our sector, retaining people and upskilling people within our sector as well. This is and has become a huge priority for us, and I'll talk to you in a moment about some of the work we're doing in that area. The fourth and final main priority is in advocacy, creating conditions for sustainable change across the sector. We knew that in its early days of creation at SORIC that advocacy would be one of our roles. Then, of course, COVID came along, and the ability to advocate for the needs of our sector within a rapidly changing dynamic environment was very important. So we worked very closely with other stakeholders, argued for the need for support for our sector. That's changing over time, the focus of that advocacy, but the role that our sector plays in stimulating sustainable economic recovery is something that we continue to talk to people about whenever one stops to listen. This slide I've got up here, even I struggle to read from over here, but just illustrates some of the depth of the connections that we have at SORIC. We have members, we loosely call them members, although we don't charge any fees for liaising with us. Falls into a number of key areas, including business support, community groups, education and skills development focused bodies, for example. It's very complex in terms of the types of bodies and organisations that we try and liaise with at some level frequently. I put that up there, though, as an example of how we are able to maximise our ability to achieve the outcomes that we're trying to by working collaboratively with other people. Through SORIC, through the COVID-19 lockdowns last year, for example, we realised that to maximise our capability, we needed to be working with bodies such as Great South and helping them in the work they were doing to reach out to businesses. So that's just a very broad overview. To talk about the work we are doing more specifically, this is a very brief list of some of our key areas of focus. So I mentioned before, advocacy is a key role. Finding new markets and opportunities is something we're continuing to engage in wherever we can with relevant government bodies, through government departments that liaise specifically with global organisations, with regional development agencies, anybody that we can make sure that our sector's kind of on the page in front of them. Capability mapping is another key piece of work we are undertaking at the moment. I mentioned before about trying to improve our capacity and capability across the sector. We have very quickly realised that to do that effectively, we needed to understand what we could already do, what the gaps are, where we could improve, and how we could tell and sell the story of our region from a manufacturing and engineering perspective to attract more work. So that capability mapping exercise is underway. It's in its very final stages, and we will soon be releasing some draft material to people across the sector. Then that network growth and building connections piece is also hugely important, particularly when we're experiencing shared issues in fields, for example, such as unreliable supply chains externally, some of the really big problems the sector's facing at the moment. Skills and education I've highlighted there. I mentioned before, it underpins everything we do. It's pointless having a very well kitted out and competitive sector if we don't have people that can staff and deliver on our promises. So it has become a major focus for us. And what I'd like to briefly talk about next is a program that we launched officially last Friday, which was the SORIC Engineering Academy. It very much does what it says on the tin. It's an academy that we have established as a highly innovative and quite unique partnership between industry and education. It's a pilot at the moment running through South Otago. I'll touch on that again in a moment. The aim is to provide learning opportunities for senior high school students in the engineering sector. So we have established a highly immersive, highly integrated program that's not for credit, and this is where it starts to differentiate itself to gateway style programs, to give students an understanding of what engineering could look like to them as a career opportunity. The key point here, though, is we want them to remain at school and complete their NCEA while they're gaining that experience. We don't want to attract students out of industry prematurely. We want to give them a really rich experience while they're still at school. We know that there are huge benefits already to students, businesses, and the wider community. The program's been up and running for 6 months. Yes, we had a launch on Friday, but we had Minister Stuart Nash there, who was very interested in what the program was about. So we had held that as an official launch, and an announcement that we are going to be rolling that particular program out, which currently lives in Balclutha, across Dunedin and Invercargill, and we have a couple of other regions as well in mind to target for an initiative like this. Up on the screen there, you'll see that we have a number of partners involved in this, which makes it, in its establishment, a fairly admin-heavy type program. But we've got 5 businesses, 3 schools, and the Ministry of Education working together under the banner of SORIC to give students a learning opportunity that they wouldn't have elsewhere. Those students are able to complete a rotational placement. So every term, they go to one of these businesses, spend a term there, observe, complete a project. They're building a tool chest and a workbench, as well as observing things like what lean manufacturing looks like, what a small business looks like, what, in the case of somebody like Calder Stewart, what it looks like to be part of a steel factory within a major organisation. They're also learning how to talk to people on the shop floor, how to behave at Smoko, what to dress, what happens if they can't come in that day. Those employability skills that are really, really important. Other partners involved in this are bodies such as MB, MSD, funding providers, philanthropic bodies, for example. And then as we think about rolling that program out, now that we know it works, other initiatives such as Southland Youth Futures and how we can integrate with some of those programs that have similar objectives in supporting young people. What next is, as I mentioned, rolling the program out, and what we are doing now is working with schools and businesses that we know will be able to step up and work with us in this. We're really, really mindful that particularly when it comes to businesses, there's a huge time commitment to something like this. However, they're also very keen to ensure that we're able to meet future labour market needs by inspiring and attracting young people into the sector. We in Southland will be working with Murahika Regeneration to ensure that we're able to work together and meeting common needs and objectives. And to do that, we'll be continuing to work with Ministry of Education and MB particularly. Ideally, and my board chair announced this in front of everybody on Friday without telling me first, mine a heart attack, but it's okay. We want to have at least 100 people engaged in a program like this next year and moving forward. So we've got some big ambitions for this particular program. This list in front of you now is a list of some of the outputs that SORIC has an eye on. Some of these are specifically relating to the academy type model. Others are more generally in terms of attracting new work, creating new jobs, improving productivity, promoting sustainable growth. Those big ticket items that we really hope we can help try and make a difference with as an organisation. Finally, just to talk about SORIC and its future. I've already talked to you about the Engineering Academy and our focus on that in the future, but more broadly, we are very keen to improve or support the development of the workforce and the manufacturing engineering labour market more generally. So we're also looking at managed apprenticeship programs and working with providers in that space as well. We're working with SIT, Otago Poly, for example, in how we can work with them to ensure that there's that industry education connection. And then looking at professional skills development and then skills needs of our current workforce when it comes to preparing itself for the future. And that future focus is something that comes up a lot. We're talking about skill shifts and mindset shifts and so on. Capability mapping and developing capacity I've talked about. And very generally, we are in a position where we're trying to make a difference to our sector. We're relatively uniquely placed to do that, and with our Southland and Otago focus, we're able to ensure that what we're doing is specifically relating to the needs of our region. I am conscious I've probably given you a whole heap of information very quickly, but I did just want to give you a general overview of what we're trying to do, what we've achieved so far. From your perspective, it would be wonderful for SORIC to be kept in mind for any discussions around labour market within this space, the needs of our sector and general promotion of us and what we're trying to achieve. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. If you have any questions or comments, more than happy to answer.
Thanks, Kerry. The program, the transition program that you've rolled out at Roxburgh, South Otago and Tokomareano high schools, are you looking at introducing that to any of the schools in the Invercargill region?
Absolutely, yes. So that's the rollout that we're focusing on next. We have a number of schools and businesses in mind that have some have already. We've created a bit of a fear of missing out on this, as many have approached us already and said we want to be part of this, and we are putting something together that will meet their needs as well as industry. What we are very keen to do is make sure that we're establishing or rolling out something that's fit for purpose and not a generic model that has to be the same everywhere. We want to make sure that we can retain that ability to be nimble and meet local need.
So with what you're achieving at the moment throughout Otago and Southland, are the issues the same across our borders within the Otago South and Greater Region?
Mostly, yes. Sometimes it's the same but slightly different. I mean, we're dealing with some very different businesses, but broadly, the issues that we're facing across those two regions are the same or similar. And the fundamental issue that's the same but across both of those areas is that genuine desire to work together to make a difference, and that collaboration and that connected, integrated supply chain is something that we're really good at and that we want to build even more.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation and expectation of what our role is from SORIC's perspective as well. Councillors, it's open for questions or comments. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just one quick question in relation to what you've delivered. It seems to me that you've very much pitched at the trade end and potentially at enticing young people into the industry through apprenticeships and other things that are a little bit less formal than that. I wonder what's at the other end of the scale, which is the tertiary end as well. So one of the big gaps that we've identified is the whole Three Waters area. So reform going on there, and it's a significant shortfall of water engineers for water specialists, and whether that's something that falls within your group's horizon, I guess.
Thank you. And absolutely agree with you. Yes, the SORIC Engineering Academy has its focus at the moment on the trades end. You're absolutely right. That's one component of our focus. In terms of the sort of future skills need and that Industry 4.0 piece, we also need to be looking at higher education and its offerings, as well as upskilling our current workforce as well. We, as an organisation, are still relatively really quite small, so there's we have to focus our efforts to where they'll have the most impact. But those three areas, high school students, students already in education and beyond within our current workforce, are absolutely where we want to make a difference.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? If not, thank you for taking the time to come along and present your aims and objectives this afternoon. We appreciate it and look forward to working with you collaboratively to see how we can help in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you. I've got some brochures here on who we are and what we do, so I'll leave those with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, our next item is an update from Thriving Southland. Mr. Kyle.
Just,
sorry, Chair.
Chair, just for transparency, I should just, the councillors note that I'm chairman of Thriving Southland. But my good colleague Richard will do the presentation because he's much better at this than me.
Thanks, Jeff. Richard, welcome to the meeting.
Welcome. Thanks very much for the invitation to come along and bring you up to speed, or I thought I'd bring you up to speed with where Thriving Southland's at, but also a few of you won't know where we come from and I suppose what our aims are and what we're trying to achieve. So Thriving Southland was set up about 2.5 years ago, and it was in a response to a lot of, I suppose, regulation, different greenhouse gases, climate change, whole lot of different issues coming at the primary sector. And it was actually set up by a group of farmers who said there's got to be a better way through this, a more positive approach to change. And that was, I suppose, the beginning of Thriving Southland. And then we were approached by the Ministry of Primary Industries around looking at how we could help farmers with regulation that was coming at them and tell them what they needed to do. And out of that, we got funding from the Sustainable Land Use Contract through MPI for $6 million over 3 years. But I suppose the difference was already in Southland there were catchment groups in Southland, and we went and said to MPI, well, actually, why don't we start working from the ground up around solutions rather than top-down solutions? So our values and vision are inspire community action, and that's actually in the rural sector and the primary sector. But as we've developed, what's happened is the communities have got involved, the rural communities have got involved in across the board, and the linkages have been recognised with the farming community right across the board. So we've moved on. I suppose we've moved on to a place where we're now working with community groups, community catchment groups right throughout Southland. So this is some of the challenges that were. And there's more to add to that list that were coming at farmers, and no direction, and really it was causing a whole lot of stress, and it still is, and you've probably seen the response to that in recent weeks. And so Thriving South, and we went out to our the catchment groups, and we said, you know, what do you need? And they said, we want to know the information, the science. We want assistance, because a lot of these catchment groups and community groups are run by one or two people, and tend to get a lot of burnout. We want to know direction, and we want to be part of moving and changing things. So this is a sort of the current approach to the easy approach to change, which is the worldview of where the problem is. Create the model, throw out the mitigation, design the policy around it, and then build the answer to that. And funding comes into that, and it's a circular model, and that tends to be the model we see with a top-down approach. So the Thriving Southland approach is obviously a lot more, and you'll see on the screen. It's a bit of a it's a messy model in a sense. But it's about actually bringing everybody into the conversation around what are the issues, what are the opportunities, and putting the people who have to create the change at the centre of that. So that's where Thriving Southland sees its role, and we talk to the catchment groups about what do they need, and we also introduce information. Put clarity around some of the science. We've done a piece of work on a science water quality lit review of all the science that was sat in the water space with Environment Southland, and put it in a document that you can actually sit down and read through and make some sense of that. And when you start putting information in front of farmers, they start looking for solutions, and communities start to be part of that. So there we go. So the key areas that we've been working in is obviously the support of the catchment groups. We've got four catchment coordinators who go out and help the group with their plans and working out their direction, their vision and values. It's about the catchment groups are actually all independent. We sit in between the funder and the catchment group. So they're independent. They look at the projects they want to work on, and they drive the changes they're interested in. Engagement, we have comms. When we link our catchment groups through Facebook, we've got a website, and so we're constantly putting information out to them, linking them together, and building engagement around the catchment groups. I've mentioned the science. The science is really important to farmers, certainly in a space of change. Water quality, greenhouse gases, even farm systems. So we're working on projects in those areas to actually looking at reductions in greenhouse gases, improvement in water quality. But that's the information we give to the farmers, and they work through this information. Cooperation, clarity, and duplication. That was a real strong feedback from the community. They didn't want more of the same, doubling up, wasting funds. So we work with the stakeholders. We've got a relationship talking with iwi about their messaging and how that needs to come through in the change around water quality. We also work with ES, Environment Southland, and we're starting to talk with processors. So everybody's, I suppose, it's bringing everybody into the room about the conversation. We've got processors who are looking internationally around consumers, looking for low footprint. That's a positive drive. It's a positive drive for change rather than negative. These are the problems we've got. And then local knowledge. We've put the local history together of the area for catchment groups, individual catchment groups. They've also got their own. We're working on brochures around their own science for their own area. It's really important that when the catchment group started, we thought there would be 4 major catchment groups around around the freshwater management units, which are the main rivers, the Aridi, the Aparima, the Matara and the Waiau. And we thought we'd have maybe 6 groups. We're actually now at 28. We ended up at 28 catchment groups, and that's because they sit around their community. And it's really, and we've found that that's really important. They work alongside the people they know, the people they trust, and that's how they get engagement. And then they start working together in bigger groups around bigger projects. So, such as a project in the Aparima where all the 6 catchment groups are joined together. It's called the ACE group, and that's all. They're looking at the whole river system and how they can work alongside each other in that space. So we've got the key focus areas: profit and resilient farm systems. So as we see change, it's actually maintaining resilience in the primary sector, and it's really important that we do that. And certainly there's going to be quite a challenge in the next few years around nutrient reduction, and that will have an impact on our farm systems and how we manage them. And it's important that it's important for the region that we see that resilience stays there. Innovation and adaptation, so that's bringing new ideas to the table and sharing them among the people doing the work. Environmental sustainability, it all links together. It's not one or the other. And finally, the emotional and physical and mental well-being. And we believe that actually by giving the direction and having some answers and solutions, and people working on their own answers and solutions, that's a real key around the mental health and well-being, that people can see the way forward. So we do have we've got projects that range from riparian planting, understanding your catchment and where is the best place for wetlands, riparian planting. We're also doing some work with land and water science with a group of farmers in the Hedgehope catchment and also in the Wendenside catchments, and they're looking at basically what's under the hood in their farm on the land, looking at physiographic and radiometric data, which actually tells them where the best areas are for mitigations within the farm system. But it also, we're looking at nitrous oxide layers as well. So within a catchment, there may be areas where greenhouse gases are emitted and where they can be mitigated. So, and when you put that in front of the people on the ground, they start putting that together and actually coming up with solutions. So that's just some of the work we're currently undertaking. There's some of the events we bring speakers in. I suppose the catchment groups have asked for speakers. They want to know where things are going and what things are looking like. So we bring speakers in looking at. So we've had the Future Farm Expo. The Aquavan was a linkage, and I think that's where a linkage with the urban community. We had 700 children in Invercargill and Gore come through and look at the Aquavan and the catchment model, and that's really also really important. We know we're all connected right down through to the New River Estuary, and it's important, and it's been important for farmers for urban engagement as well. So we've got a range of projects on the go, and that we've got another 2 years before we're looking for the next round of funding. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Councillors, it's over to you for any questions or comments you have. Councillor Clark.
Richard, I think your chairman was quite right that you're by far a better presenter than he would have been. Just one issue. I noticed that your group seems to be quite reactive to issues that are presented to the farming sector. Are they also proactive as well? So, like, are they getting to government thinking around things like SNAs and other things that have caused issues in recent times?
We're apolitical.
Okay.
And when they are, I would say that the lead farmers within our catchment groups are looking at the issues that are coming at them and how to manage them.
Yep.
But as far as Thriving Southland, we're apolitical. The catchment groups have their own opinions, and but they're I would say they're actually they're leading in some of the thinking, certainly around how to mitigate some of the challenges.
Sure. Thank you.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Richard, just looking at your, I'm on the map here that shows the catchment groups areas, and it seems that Invercargill rural seems to be missed out a wee bit. Is that sort of
actually it's the Waituna sits there as well, and we don't have a catchment group in the Waituna, but the New River Estuary Forum sort of sits on it.
okay? It just shows the four there, and it's greyed out with the fjords and everything. I was just wondering, those farmers that are obviously right.
They link into the Tiano farmers, and they link into the Waio catchment.
Okay.
Check. It's probably as a region, we'll be the furthest ahead, as our region is pretty well covered with catchment groups compared to the rest of the country, and we're seeing that we're seeing a lot of catchment groups move throughout the country now. So, I think we're in a good position.
So my other question was regarding carbon farming. Yeah, is that something that with farmers being under a lot of stress and taking the option of just bailing out and planting in trees, really good productive land?
Yeah, we certainly hear that from farmers, and our role is to put the information in front of them to make decisions to look at that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, thank you, Richard, for not only the presentation but the answering of questions this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Councillors, the next item 7, which is the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Fund Committee from June 17th. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In confirming the minutes of this meeting, I would like to actually make extra note of the well-formed applications we've had for this committee's funding round, often with the help of our staff, so special thanks to the staff for doing so. It's quite a full meeting, taking most of the afternoon, and I think particularly the members that attend for giving that afternoon up with all the preparation they have to do for the reading, but more particularly the staff that they help. So I'd like to formally move those minutes be confirmed.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder? Councillor Skell. So the minutes are being received.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Need your assistance with the next one too. I'm happy to move that the minutes for the hearings for the Environmental Reserves Omnibus Draft Management Plan be received.
I shall second they be received.
Thank you. It's a recommendation that comes up later in the agenda. It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Minutes from the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee held on the 13th of July.
I'll move those.
Thanks, Councillor
Second
Emerson
those.
and Councillor Soper. Any matters arising? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. That brings us to the quarterly report up to the 30th of June. In receiving the report, going to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we're now up to date. So as we integrated a new reporting system, it had meant we were running just a little bit behind time over the past couple of reports, but we're only just into August and we've got the year end 30th of June. So welcome, Jamie and Patricia.
Thanks. While we do have a report for 30th June, I do want to emphasise these are draft numbers. They will be different to the numbers you'll see when we bring you the annual report later in the year, because we are still going through with a fine-tooth comb, making sure we've got things in the right place. So this is a draft, but it gives an indication of where we are. Do you want to?
Yeah, so just on that, so we're currently showing a surplus of 4.9 million. Get the numbers the right way around.
If you want to revise that, that's fine.
Yeah, so it's currently sitting at 4.9. However, we've still got a number of accounting adjustments we need to make, and one of the big ones is revenue recognition of the treatment of the subsidies received for the shovel-ready and three water projects. So the money we've received for that is about 4.5 off the top of my head. Some of that will be still kept as revenue for this year, but there will be a proportion of that will be put to the balance sheet as a liability, and it will lower our surplus as well. We're probably projecting that we will be around the break-even mark after all these adjustments are done, which is a wee bit better than what we had in the annual plan. Annual plan, we had a small loss, but we're aiming for about break-even, so that's good for us. So some other items just to highlight is, so capital spend is in line with what we had forecast through the LTP process, but it is down by 13 million on what we originally said in the annual plan. Most of these projects have been deferred into the first few years of the LTP, so they are still happening. From the net debt side of things, so the holding company has repaid us the $30 million advance we provided them about 5 years ago, of which we've used those funds to repay our borrowings, so there's a zero net debt impact from that. And if you have a look at the cash flow statement, right down the bottom, you'll see it's showing us about $45 million cash and cash equivalents, which is technically cash at bank. We've applied accounting treatment for some of the term deposits that mature between July and September, and they have to be treated as cash rather than an investment. So that's why that number stands out quite a lot compared to where it previously used to be. But then the investments has also dropped as well to match that off. They're the big key points I've got. Otherwise, is there any questions on the report?
Thank you. So while it's easy to get excited about an operating surplus of $5 million or 4.9, essentially that comes back to square with payment off from the shovel-ready projects. You're quite right to point out that we've moved from a deficit to breaking even, and given the year that we've been through, that's a very favourable outcome. Repayment of debt was the other thing that was being focused on. So I guess that helps to create headroom moving forward rather than here's an operating surplus. Let's get excited and see what we can put on, because it's not really an operating surplus. So thanks for that. There's a series of recommendations on page 26, which I'll look for a mover for, and then we'll open it for debate or discussion. Councillor Pottinger moving, seconded Councillor Clark. It's open for questions or comments, councillors. Councillor Clark.
If I didn't ask some questions, well, there'd be something wrong. Jamie, I've got a range of questions, so I've got about a dozen or so. Just wanted some clarification on page 27 of board books as we're working our way through, that we've got an underspend of about $12.7 million in non-capital expenditure. Am I reasonable to assume that when we look at things like Anderson's House, that's been in our planning for more than just last year, and the same for the water tower, which goes back to 2018-19, that when we say we haven't spent the money, that when we come to doing the spending next year, the capital expenditure will be sitting in our reserve accounts?
If that was funded from rates, yes, they'll be sitting in the net debt accounts.
Yep.
If they're funded from borrowings, we apply that into our forecast for borrowings going forward.
Okay, yeah, totally understand it, thank you. On page 30, there's on the spreadsheets there's a 660,000 shortfall of expenditure over a forecast for rental revenue, and I'm scratching my head trying to think, where are we falling short on on our rental income.
When we had a quick look at this, there's a bit of money from parks which was initially indicated to arrive this year that hasn't eventuated. So we will be looking at that when we do reforecasting for next year to make sure that is coming in, or we'll be reforecasting that to remove it.
Yeah, I guess my perspective would be it would be helpful when you do the annual report to know whether there's any shortfall occurring in our two big investment areas, which are Don Street and the Aoru Farm.
Yeah, yes, that will be
Because
definitely.
I know we talked about net surpluses, but they don't necessarily include the servicing of the debt that might be associated with it, I guess. Yep, so that would be helpful. On page 33, it talks about proceeds of sale of investments of 12.3 million. I take it that's tied up with the forestry company.
The proceeds of sale of investments will actually be the proceeds from the
It's the term deposits.
term deposits.
Oh,
yeah.
term deposit. Yep. Okay, yep, that's fine. On page 35, going through board books again, it talks about our borrowing level being at 89 million, give or take a little bit of change. And I notice in there that we refer sometimes about having a cap at 2.5 times revenue, but in fact our LGFA cap is actually 3 times at the moment, isn't it? Even though we might not want to be there.
The possible cap is 3 times.
Yeah, potentially coming back to 2.8. So that's quite a really positive position, isn't it? If we're sitting on borrowings of just a little bit short of 90 million, and potentially we could be at 280 million if we wanted to go right to the cap. For our council, that's a really positive position to be in, I guess.
A really good position to be in. Yep,
that's fine. Page 36 has got some figures about cash and cash investments. Seem to be totaling out about $54 million if I take away the staff investment. So that's quite an increase on last year. And just a little bit of advice on that. Given our LTP is based on having a baseline there of $40 million, does that give us roughly $14 million worth of capacity to do some things that we might need to do this year? Some examples of that might be around the museum, around funds that may be required for the city block.
I would say no on that. So a lot of this has already been earmarked. So some of these cash deposits are already earmarked for different things within next year's, the current year's plan.
So I guess when the annual report comes out, it would be helpful to know where that's earmarked. We've had discussion in the past with Dave Foster when he was here about cash being king, but that changes sometimes, I guess, when you've got low potential to borrow from LGFA.
Yeah. With the annual report, we will be supplying a list of movements.
Sure.
From into the reserve accounts in our equity, and that's part of that, matching those off with investments as well. And the last thing for me is on page 40, and I see that we've got some service delivery issues around the Bluff water supply, and without any explanation what that actually is. So if you can help me with that, or somebody can help me. That's got a nice big red cross beside it.
Erin, can you try?
There's a note there, rather bold.
I'm missing it.
Note 13.
Sorry. The Bluff water supply item is one that it's no change of status. It's one that relates to the condition of the reticulation in Bluff. It was something that I questioned when I first arrived, and it is something that we've essentially, I guess, put a standard on ourselves of liking to meet that AA requirement across our network, but that would be a renewal of pretty much the entire Bluff reticulation network to meet that standard. So it's not something that we have programmed in the long-term plan at this point in time, but it is not a change from what we've had previously.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Crackett.
Just on that, what's the significance difference between AB and AA? Just I know.
To be honest, it's an Alistair Murray question, specifically around why we've put that standard on ourselves. It's not something that comes into the do we comply with drinking water standards question. We comply across the board, but then when you get down into the technical detail of how different supplies and reticulations are graded, that comes into that different level of detail.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Just as a supplementary there, it might be helpful when we go to our annual report to get some clarification of that. Because with Three Waters heading our way, it'd be helpful to know what standard we're currently achieving. And even though we don't know what the water entity will want, the higher up we get, the better it is.
There will be additional commentary added
Sure.
to these activities.
Yep. Thank you.
Things in the annual report.
Thank you. Further questions?
I've just got one quick question. Just on page 29, the regulatory non-financial performance. I just noticed that it's sort of only 50% is unfavourable. Is it worse than before? Is it going backwards, or because it had been coming right? I thought performance.
Board Books doesn't want to work on.
Sorry, Councillor Arnold, which one were you looking at?
Regulatory on page 29, Mr. Chairman.
Looking at page 39 in Board Books, where it's got the detail for regulatory, it does appear to be the same measures have been at a similar level right for the whole year. So it's not something that's happened in the last quarter. On a quick look at those, but that's something that will get. There's a lot more work going to be done in these particular areas for the annual report.
Yeah.
So it hasn't worsened, but it hasn't improved either.
Okay, thank you.
It stayed about the same, I think, was probably be some summation of that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Further questions? If not, it's been moved and seconded. Motion to receive the report and the 3 notes. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. The next item is a proposed right-of-way name in relation to Duns Road. There's a recommendation in there which meets our requirements.
Move.
Move Councillor Kett, seconded Councillor Lewis. I'm guessing it's Ochile.
It's an old Scottish term, isn't it?
I'll take that under advisement.
I looked it up.
It's been moved and seconded to put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Which brings us to the Environmental Reserves Omnibus Draft Management Plan.
Yeah. Scary.
This was an innovation, I guess, in bundling everything together. Councillor Lewis and I sat and heard, His Worship was with us for a portion of the hearings as well. We've received the minutes a little earlier on, and we've got the recommendations that come from the process, which really it's up to council to receive or reject. And if we reject it, we go back and start again. But and the great thing is that we don't see any overwhelming desire to do that. But first, congratulations on the process. There seemed to be pretty good engagement with it. There was, by and large, really positive feedback from the submitters, and then the post-submission engagement with them seemed to work really well. As a trial process, are you pleased with how it's gone, Cassie?
I am. We had a really good, lengthy process with getting together with all the key agencies, stakeholders and iwi as well. So I think that strengthened our relationships with the groups that we consulted with from pre-engagement through to post-consultation as well. So it'll be great to see how we go from here.
Well, let's test it.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion on the floor first, Councillor Soper? Are you moving?
I was going to say there's over 300 pages here. It's very impressive reading. Congratulations on the whole process, and congratulations to the councillors who sat on the hearings, and I am happy to move it. all three recommendations.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to second that, and I'd much sooner it got approved because to have to read that again, let alone to get the staff to actually rewrite it, I think we would not be welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Caroline, in relation to page 131 and 132 of your report, hard copy, or 203 and 204 of board books, there's some comments in relation to the Otatara Scenic Reserve, which I just want some clarification on, would be helpful. In 5.12.10.2 on page 131, which is your hard copy, it says no exterior expansions to the hall will be permitted. So you're talking there just about the hall, or you're talking about the car park that surrounds?
I'm going to take that on advice from Cassie because she actually did the consultation around that area. Cassie, is that just to say the actual footprint of the car park there?
So that's just saying the expansions around the hall. So if they were to extend it out onto the car park or like further from its platform.
I understand that. So just moving forward to the following pages of 132, it talks here about future development. It talks about the Otatara School and the Otatara Land Care Group, and I guess you'll probably be aware that there are some suggestions that the car parking that's around the hall should be greater. And so I just want to know what that last paragraph, which is the first development, future development, actually means, and what your view and take on that is. It's my assessment that the school may look, and that's subject to council approval of course, may look at expanding the car park there because they've got some parking issues around the school, which may involve freeing up a hectare of land. The scenic reserve is 40 hectares, so it's about 2.5%. So I'm just wondering whether any of those provisions leave the door open for an approach by people that are involved, or whether that it's much more closed.
So if they're proposing to expand the car park, which would potentially take up some of the scenic reserve land,
sure, yep.
That would require, under the Reserves Act, a formalised process. So we'd need to just go out for public consultation on that for a change in the reserve classification to allow for extra car parking.
Just for that portion of the land.
Yep,
that's fine. Thank you. That's me done.
Comfortable with that?
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors?
No.
If not, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Councillors, that brings us to item 13, which is the adoption of the elected member allowance and expenses policy. And Liz is presenting the report. Welcome along.
Thank you.
Ably assisted by Michael, his lovely assistant. Give us a twirl. No, don't. Thanks, Liz. Councillors have had a chance to read through the paper, but is there anything you're wishing to draw their attention to in particular?
There's very little change to what council is already doing, but it is a requirement of the Remuneration Authority that we have this policy and that it's on our website. The two areas that I would like to draw council's attention to is the childcare allowance for elected members. As staff, we are proposing that this be left on the table for the new triennium. A number of councils throughout the country have adopted it in various forms, and some haven't adopted it at all. So our recommendation is that be left for the new triennium. And the only other one is around council having the ability to charge councillors for the use of their equipment privately. Again,
So, just so you're aware that we have the iPads that we're able to use. They're used for council business, but no doubt we've all used them personally as well, and whether or not there's a chargeback. So essentially kind of kicking for touch and seeing where things sit at the beginning of the next triennium. Just before I go to Councillor Soper, is there likely to be any preparation done between now and then of papers that'll go to the next council?
yes, we plan to. Certainly we want to do a lot more research around the childcare proposal and the estimated costs. There are some very strict guidelines presented by the Remuneration Authority as to when it can be paid and how it can be paid. So doing some research around that and the potential costs.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The childcare allowance matter is what I wanted to raise. I see that issue as quite an important part of actually preparing for the next year's elections and attracting some candidates for those elections for whom such an allowance might be quite an important matter, and therefore adding to the diversity we want to see at this council table. So I'm rather reluctant to see it deferred until after the next triennium election. And I suppose I'm foreshadowing that I would like to suggest an amendment to recommendation 2 to try and achieve some certainty before the next triennium in this council's decision on that matter. I think it would be unfortunate to have it left and to have yet another election next year where we might actually have a less diverse range of potential candidates because we haven't got such an equity provision available.
Thank you. Noted. I think the suggestion was we're able to come up with a recommendation potentially for the next council to adopt. But Councillor Crackett and then Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. I'm sure it's not surprising that I would like to speak in support of Councillor Soper's amendment. However, like Liz has said, the Remuneration Authority is very clear on the guidelines and they actually won't apply to me in my current situation with my daughter. I see it as really integral that we have it in place for the next triennium as to ensure that we can remove as many barriers to entry for participation for incoming elected members as possible. It is about equity and about having that same opportunity that right across the board, no matter who you are, and that is a clear prohibitor.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Look, on that same topic, for us to move ahead before the next triennium to try and speed things up, wouldn't we need costings in front of us to something? You know, you can't sort of vote on a scheme that you have really no idea of what it may cost. You know, that just doesn't seem right. I mean, would something come back to us that would?
Yes, I guess the issue that's being raised is around a matter of timing. Do you want to workshop and develop that part of the policy between now and the end of the term, or do you want to?
I think Councillor Soper raises a good point that moving into an election is it just opens up. It's like obviously we've made the call on first past post rather than STV, but this does create an opportunity for a broader spectrum of people to apply. If we had a figure involved, it may just be like I've got no idea what size it would be.
So, with bearing in mind that we don't have a motion on the table yet, and trying to get the feel of the meeting, is it the will of the committee that we really workshop this through to come up with a recommended policy on both of these issues before the end of this term? Is that the feeling that I'm getting?
Yes.
Councillor Soper.
Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest an amendment that referred the
There's
issue.
no amendment required. There's no motion yet.
Yeah, but no, I'm foreshadowing that when we had the motion on the floor, I was going to suggest an amendment that meant we asked staff to do some work on finding the comparable policies already passed by other councils, doing some costings, bringing it back to a future meeting of this committee and workshopping it. So that was what I had seen as sensible. I'm not suggesting that we adopt a childcare allowance today. I am suggesting that some more work could be done for us to consider adopting before next year.
Right.
Even into early next year in preparation.
I'm looking at the motions then. So if we leave recommendation 1 as it is, but recommendation 2 that this council continues to work on developing this policy before the end of the term for both of those. Are you comfortable with that? Happy to move that way?
If you want to add in with staff to bring back a report and council to workshop the issue.
Yep.
I think that will give the guidance.
So councillors, are you clear on what it is that we're doing with items 2 and 3? Staff will workshop the items, staff will develop a report, and we'll have reached a conclusion before the end of term. Okay? So Councillor Sabra, are you moving that? We haven't put the change up. Were you listening?
Yes.
Excellent.
Mr. Chair, and the only other thing, perhaps if we give staff a timetable, so perhaps by the November meeting of this committee, we could have the first draft of a report.
Well, we've got to workshop it first, and I want to make sure, first of all, that we're not jumping in on top of any other workshops. But I mean, obviously, we want to have it resolved before the middle of next year. But can we leave that timetable open?
To discuss. Yep.
Yep. So you're moving?
I'm moving.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Amundsen. Any questions around what we're doing? Councillor Clark.
Just some wider questions, and bear with me being a first-term councillor. I'm not aware that these policies, these provisions are available to elected members. Whether that was missed in my induction or not, I'm not sure. So if there are current rates that prevail, I've sadly missed.
They don't exist for us at present, but the opportunity for it to be introduced became available to councils, I think, through a consultative process towards the end of the previous term.
Sure.
Council voted that it supported, for example, the idea of a childcare allowance. This is really just the mechanics of exploring how we bring those options about.
Yeah, and I was referring to more so to page 737 of board books, which talks about allowances for using personal printers and mobile phones and the likes, and actually a daily travel allowance when you're away from Invercargill, like going to Christchurch or Dunedin or whatever. So that was one issue. But the other issue is it would be helpful to get some staff advice when they're coming back to us on the tax implications of this as well, because I mean this year I was able to claim quite a bit of tax relief through my annual tax return by using my personal cell phone for council work. Same for computers and photocopying paper and so on. It's quite a long list that you can claim for. Would that, and I'd like some advice on whether that would be changed or implicated by having an allowance that sort of covered that as well.
The allowance already exists, but certainly we can go through that with the workshop process.
Sure.
Councillor Crackett.
I'm not an accountant, but I do work for one. So it was my understanding that if we're being reimbursed for what the allowance for communications, for example, so say your phone, you wouldn't claim it as an expense because it's you've already been provided for.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't do that if I was you.
Oh no, I wasn't suggesting anybody would, but it might be helpful to get some advice from staff about which system it's best to be in.
Yeah.
Like, would we be in the council funded one, or whether we just incur the cost ourselves and be able to claim back? And
I advise you to get an accountant, Councillor Clark.
Oh, I mean,
I know some good ones if you would like.
No. Michael's sitting here. He might be able to give us some advice at a later stage, which would help. But I just want to be clear that there are some rates that apply already. I'm putting aside the childcare stuff.
Yep. Thank you, Michael.
Through yourself, the chair. A number of these are allowances and are already applied to the councillors as per their remuneration. It's only those that are via expense claims, as you'll see itemised in each individual one, that you need to put through a claims process. The ones where it stipulates allowance are already in the remuneration as it stands. The new figures are what will be adjusted going from the 1st of July.
So just for my clarification on that, Michael, so the allowances are built in, but we're still able to claim for things like the daily travel allowance.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And I think there are criteria around that as well.
Yep.
It's over a certain distance before it applies.
And time frames as well.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. So we've got a motion. Are there any further questions or comments? If not, Councillor Pottinger, it's a very late vote.
It is, and it is maybe a bit trivial, but talking about travel time. Now, a few of us went to the local government conference in Blenheim, and I got a flight first thing in the morning, as did you. We were up there in good time. Councillor Crackett, unfortunately, took 10 hours from Invercargill to Wellington. Now, travel time, is this travel time included in her marathon trip?
No, thank you.
No, it's okay.
there's no allowance for your actual time, more the mechanical expenses of vehicle mileage.
No, that is fine.
Yeah, good question.
Just feeling sorry for my fellow councillor.
And no doubt it worked in reverse for people trying to get home too. Okay, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. You can lead a horse to water. Right, that brings us to the item from Liz, which is a request from Councillor Crackett to attend the young elected members' hui. 2 recommendations. I'm happy enough to move them.
Second them.
Put that all in favour.
Aye. Aye.
Against? No issues, Alex. Enjoy it.
I don't even need to talk. Thank you.
No,
You can give us a full report when you come back.
That'd be good.
Happy for that.
I think we see the value in your attendance at that event and recognise the role that you play with YEM at national level as well.
Thank you.
Which brings us to the activity report. Which also includes an item that I think I'd raised with Claire a little earlier about IVEM. When we were going through our declarations of interest, I discovered I was still a director of IVEM, along with Councillor Abbott there on Zoom, waving appropriately. When we discovered that even though the company is on the shelf as the 2 remaining directors who are on it, that we are part of that. There were 3. One of the directors is no longer a member of council, and that's really behind item 2. Steve, is there anything else that you'd like to draw our attention to?
Yeah, just a question at the last PPP meeting was raised by Councillor Scout around patronage of the Civic, and have we noticed any trends around how people are engaging with our events? And Richard McCaw has noted in his report on the Civic that what we're finding is that there are similar patterns of engagement with the events, but there's very much a later booking process, and people are leaving to the last minute because they've learnt after COVID that you wait until you actually know that you can go. And that is creating some issues for our promoters, but it's one of those things that we're just having to deal with from an operations point of view. Look, the only other 2 things I'd like to draw your attention to, in the library range of programs, just the degree and the range of different partnerships that our team have in the community with corrections, with Well South, and also with a number of schools that we're engaging with, especially around the change to the history curriculum. We are evolving and we're keeping up with what's going on, but we're also using our community partners to effect, I think, really well. And that's also similar to the message in Hei Wakatuia. If you look at the participation numbers, you'll see that there's an asterisk below the table which also talks about the number of school children that have engaged in the services outside of the facility itself. I think good effort from the team. So I'll pass over to Trudy, unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Look, I'll echo your comments around the community engagement. We've always seen from the library, for example, lots of innovation over previous years, and that's continuing with new staff in there looking for new ways to activate the space after we've gone through and changed it. I see school groups being taken on tours around town. A lot of stuff that we just haven't necessarily seen in the past. So it's great to see those things happening. We know from, as you've pointed out with Hei Wakatuia, the engagement that we were able to get through Janet DeWatt's last exhibition, which saw extended is great, and council gave an indication that it wants to see that type of external engagement increasing. So it's really positive. Councillors, there's 2 recommendations: that the report is received and the change to clause 15.1 of IBM's constitution. Since I'm part of that, I'm not going to move it.
I shall move it in that case, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Lewis, Councillor Skelton. Thank you. Questions or comments? If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Which brings us to the end of the public part of the meeting. We will move into public excluded to discuss the items as laid out on the agenda, the receiving of minutes of the Community Wellbeing Fund Committee meeting and the confirmation of minutes from the Performance Policy and Partnerships last meeting, and for the reasons as outlined under section 721 of the Local Government Act. Once we have moved into public excluded and allowing for Mr. Grant and Mr. Mackenzie to remain part of the meeting, it's my intention to adjourn the meeting so we don't have to ask the public to leave, because we have an extraordinary council meeting to follow. And once we've dealt with the public excluded part of the extraordinary council meeting, then we'll come back and finish this off. Are you comfortable with that process?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, I'll move that we go into public excluded for the reasons as out. Sorry, Councillor Amundsen.
Because it's just the moving of minutes, if there's no discussion about any of those public excluded minutes, I'm happy to move both sets of those minutes.
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay, I'm comfortable receiving that. Councillors, you comfortable with that? In that case, I'll put the motion, since it's been put by Councillor Amundsen. Seconded. I missed who seconded them. Councillor Pottinger, thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Right.
Carried. That brings us to the end of PPP, and